Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Healing Hub deep dive session here with Noel Harburger and myself. Noel, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you. Ryan, how are you?
I'm fantastic. This is like my new office. I have to work on the lighting and I have to get some artwork here, but this is my new office out the back of my new house. So I'm just feeling like I'm getting comfortable in my
It's
in my new
exciting when
space.
you've got a new study and a new office to get into. Yeah,
Yeah, I was just last night I was putting these shelves up and working out what books to put in there, and it was all very, very exciting.
very exciting.
So today we are talking about understanding boundaries and also boundary setting. This is the deep dive call as we're recording. We're in August of 2024. The last deep dive session that Matt and myself did was kind of on boundaries as well, but we ended up talking mainly around anger and anger regulation and suppression and that kind of thing. I'm sure that will come up today again, Noel, because the boundaries and anger are so intertwined. You know, anger is a human emotion that we have, and like all other emotions we have as human beings, they are very necessary and they are there for a reason. And one of, if not the main purpose of anger, is to let someone or something know that a boundary has been overstepped. And
That's
so many
it.
people who come into this work have issues with boundaries. And so today we're going to be, it's not going to be in two sections. We're just going to be having a chat and talking on some dot points around boundaries to give people a really good understanding of what they are, their function, what healthy boundaries are, unhealthy boundaries, all of that kind of stuff. And then we're going to be, Noel's going to be sharing his screen and we have some actual exercises around boundaries. So it can be very experiential as well. So, Noel, why don't you kick us off here? What's the first little talking point around this topic of boundaries?
Well, I mean, I guess just to ping off what you said, um, everyone, pretty well everyone I've ever met has some kind of issue around boundaries. It's one of those areas of human development that is really important, and we can all learn something from boundaries and working on our boundaries. So yeah, it's a huge issue for everyone, and a lot of um, good personal development work includes reflecting on your relationship to your boundaries.
Yeah. Have you
Because
have you in your
yeah,
experience, Noel, sorry to jump in because I'm thinking
no, go
about
for it.
the people that I've worked with and we've had in the center and now the community of people that we work with. And what we see the vast, vast majority of the time is a lack of boundaries. So having no boundaries at all, having boundaries overstepped constantly, people pleasing and all that kind of thing. Have you seen many clients over the years who are maybe the other end of the spectrum,
Yeah,
like too overly boundary?
absolutely. Yeah. I mean that they're the two places we can go. We can either become underbounded and end up being appeasing, um, overly nice, overly accommodating, overly responsible for other people's feelings. That's certainly one place many people that have been traumatized will end up going as a result of boundary violations. But a lot of people go to becoming overbounded, especially if they've had early developmental trauma where their boundaries have been betrayed or intruded upon or violated repetitively. The other place that people go, which is partly dependent on their temperament and what's modeled to them and what they've learned, how they've been attuned to, but they can go to becoming overbounded, stuck in the fight mode, hyper vigilant and guarded, and kind of over orienting to cues of danger all the time, and just ready for a fight, ready to say fuck you or fuck off. And so their boundaries are kind of rigid and they have trouble noticing cues of safety, letting in support, having moments of intimacy. I've got a couple of clients who are more stuck down that end of the continuum. They're always angry, and they're exhausted, and they get burnt out just by being constantly guarded and hyper vigilant all the
It
time.
makes sense, doesn't it? The image that I get when you describe that is this, we've set up this big brick wall, like an old school, fort or something, and there's all this,
Yeah,
and then we're marching around the walls all the time, just making sure that no one not just gets in, but no one even gets close to those walls. And anyone that we
and
do, we pull the gun out and say, "Get out of here."
that's a great metaphor. Yeah, it's like having a big fortress around you, and it can really lead people to feel quite lonely and bitter. but the belief is that the only way I can stay safe is to not trust people, keep people at a distance, and stay angry and aggressive.
And that's what it
Yeah.
comes down to, right? Even that other end of the spectrum, it's, I can only maintain attachment or receive love or receive acceptance if I keep appeasing other human beings and just not having
Mm,
any boundaries at all, uh, doing things for other people, even when it's abandoning myself and my own needs. And so it's interesting, and that happens so much in this work, that either end of the spectrum can be
right.
unhealthy, as in it will manifest symptoms at some point, but both ends of those spectrum, the person is just trying to feel safe.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. They're all organized around how to stay safe. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You have an analogy around boundaries being like a cell membrane, which I absolutely love. Do you want to explain that?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think it's a useful metaphor just to think about boundaries. Like when someone is unbounded, it's like they don't have a cell membrane. Therefore, they take in what is unhealthy, what is not true for them, what is not theirs. They're very susceptible to just let it in, just like a cell without a membrane. There's just no boundary. So they can absorb other people's projections, transferences, emotional state, energetic state. And when people have no cell membrane, they will often feel uncontained and unsafe because there's just no sense of differentiation between self and other. So I think it's a useful membrane, a useful metaphor to teach clients, because when you think of a cell with a membrane, you think that the cell will keep out what is toxic. They keep out what is not true to the cell, what is not healthy for the cell. And that's what a healthy psychological boundary does. It just lets in what is healthy and what is true and what the person can own as their truth. And it keeps out what is toxic, what is unhealthy, what is not true. So yeah, it's kind of like a metaphor that I think is quite helpful.
Oh, it's
Yeah.
so great, because then also the cell membrane will let in what is nourishing for the cell and will help with its overall growth. And it's such a more, I guess, flexible kind of state, as opposed to that person with the big stone wall walking around guarding it all the time, very, very rigid, like absolutely nothing's going to come in, where it's like, we are here to be nourished and to grow as human beings. And that involves letting in the things that are nourishing for our soul and our spirit, whilst also first of all knowing what's toxic as well, because that's another topic to
Mm,
talk about, because oftentimes we don't know, and we have to go through this process where we learn what is good and bad for us. I've had experience many times with clients when we go through this process and they've been very unboundaried, and we ask, what is it that you want to do in this life, or who do you want to be? Or what do you even like doing? And they'll look at me and just go, I have no idea. And they just don't know, because they have, and I did this for many, many decades. We define ourselves based on the acceptance or the ideas other people have of us. And so when we
yeah.
do that for many, many years and decades, then we do lose that sense of self and autonomy. And reclaiming our boundaries is really a journey of reclaiming our autonomy, of first of all knowing ourselves, knowing what's good
Yeah.
for us and nourishing, knowing what's toxic, and then being that cell membrane to let things in and out. Hi, Nicole.
Hi, Nicole. Yeah, well said, Ryan. I think that's so true that, I mean, partly having healthy boundaries is about having permeability, and flexibility in our boundaries. Having the capacity to have rigid boundaries when we need in some contexts that perhaps are toxic or abusive. But when we're surrounded in field conditions where there's support and kindness, then to have the flexibility and the choice to have more permeable, open boundaries. So I think that's partly what healthy boundaries look like. But yeah, your point that boundaries, when people have unhealthy boundaries, they usually it's a reflection of having an undeveloped sense of self that is a result of earlier lack of, well, kind of developmental trauma, where there's a lack of attunement and support for the emergence of a sense of self, for a sense of who I am, what I feel, what I value, what I want, what I don't want. When we have that sense of a self, we have much more access to a sense of boundary. So I think part of helping people develop boundary skills, amongst a bunch of things, is to build the sense of self, to start to know what you value, what you feel, what you want, what you don't want, what feels is mine and true for me, and what feels is not mine and not true for me. And that's part of the important work of reclaiming boundaries amongst, there are other things we can say about that, but I think that's very important.
Yeah, yeah, and just to touch on briefly around, some of the circumstances that can breed what Noel was talking about. A lot of it is, being not accepted when we're in certain emotional states. We bang on about this so much, me, you, and Matt, but it's very, very important that, when we're young, when we are really angry, having a tantrum, having a very natural response of a 4-year-old, 6-year-old, 8-year-old, then we are either gotten very mad at or put into timeout, which is literally like, go into a separate space from me until you've sorted this anger out, and then you can come back. And so we're not accepted in certain emotional states. And then as we grow up, we don't accept ourselves in those emotional states. Oftentimes
Yeah.
there's a neglect there. And if we're neglect, we feel a disconnect in attachment. So we're trying to work out, we maybe don't think of this consciously as a small child, but we're like, how can I reattach to these people? And it's like, oh, what does dad want me to do? Or what does mum want me to do? And that mightn't be, oftentimes isn't my authentic expression, but I will start to do that because I just want to reattach. And this is how we start to learn to do things for other people and ourselves. And we become I had a friend describe it that he saw himself as like a chameleon. And so he'd go into these different scenarios with different people, and his personality traits and the idea of him would always change depending on where he was, because he didn't have that grounded, that anchor sense of who he really was inside. So he would become whatever the situation called for. And that gets really weird because then we're left in these moments where we're by ourselves and it's like, well, what or who am I now? Because I have no reference point of other people here to bounce off. And that can be super scary. I'm speaking from experience here. It's super scary to sit in that space of like, please someone come around and be with me so I can remember who I am again.
Mm. Yeah, so true. I mean, I can relate to that too. That was how I adapted to my history, was to be appeasing and accommodating and kind of confluent, which is a Gestalt therapy term where you downplay your differences and overemphasize your similarities in order to belong and be liked. And that was very much my adaptation as a child. And you reminded me of that famous saying by Gabor Mate that attachment trumps authenticity. That the need to stay attached as a child, the biological need to connect is so much stronger than any other need as a child. That's the core developmental need. I need to connect and be loved. And a child will pick up very quickly, how do I have to be in order to be loved? And what parts of myself do I need to shut down that don't get accepted? So as a child, they will betray their true self in order to keep the connection. And that's just a natural developmental decision. But as we grow up, we start to feel that core dilemma. I want to be true to myself. I want to be authentic. But the risk of that is I might disappoint someone and risk abandonment. And that a lot of people with boundary struggles have that dilemma, that when they go to set a boundary and to say no or to make a request, it activates the abandonment fear. And that sometimes drives them to go back into that confluent appeasement mode, which is very common because it's really risky to have good boundaries sometimes. You have to risk loss, you have to risk abandonment, you have to risk a rupture. And for someone with a big abandonment history or an insecure attachment, that's so terrifying for them that they'll do anything to keep the connection. Especially some of the like more anxious, preoccupied attachment styles. That's what they've learned. Sometimes the avoidant attachment style is, I don't want to have any needs. I don't want to trust people. I'm just going to stay self-reliant and autonomous and have rigid boundaries so no one ever hurts me again. So no one ever betrays me again. And that's where people go to the overbounded place.
which also prevents us from connecting on a very deep level.
What was that?
And that really prevents us from connecting with other people because we're always on guard around people and ready to not let them in at any chance. I was going to ask Noel,
Yeah.
what was your process in, you know, working through that? You said this was an adaptation that you had. What was your experience of working through that and learning boundaries, and what was that like?
Great question. Well, in my early 20s, I realized I was, I was pretty lost and I had a very poor sense of self. And luckily, I had the motivation to get therapy. And I started, my first foray into therapy was Gestalt group therapy, where there's about 10 people in the group.
Jumping right in.
And I jumped right in. And it was perfect for what I needed because I needed to learn how to be in connection with people. I had more of an avoidant attachment style. So I avoided being vulnerable. I avoided having needs. And I certainly didn't know what I wanted. So my boundaries were, I didn't have any sense of what my boundaries were. And over time, just the repeated experience of being invited to be real, witnessing other people's boundaries being respected was really helpful. So having that modeled, like seeing other people model what healthy boundaries look like, seeing other members of the group say, no, I don't want to talk about this, or I'm not ready to go there, and seeing their boundary respected kind of helped me learn, oh, maybe I can say no. And having many experiences of what I would call reparative relational experiences of showing my vulnerability, expressing my needs, showing up authentically, and being met with kindness and attunement and care. Those repeated experiences helped me build a sense of self. And as that sense of self built, I started to know what I wanted and what I needed and what I felt. This is a process that's been a lifelong process, really, but I started that journey, and that really did help me learn to have more capacity to have boundaries and also to let in support and receive it, because I was terrible at that either. I had this, my dominant self-image is I can cope on my own. I don't need support. I'm fine. Yeah.
I'm fine.
That's a nutshell response to your question.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I love it. I love it. Just a lot of contrary evidence to what you'd had up until that point. Yeah, I love that.
Exactly.
I love that.
Yeah.
Is there any other, before we jump into, because you have some slides to share of actual exercises today, which is really cool. Is there anything else you want to touch on there in your points there, Noel? We've spoken probably more about unhealthy boundaries, maybe talking about what a healthy one looks like.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's, when we have healthy boundaries, for a start, the difference it makes is that we feel safe in the world. Like when you think of it, if you can't access your healthy no, the world's going to feel scary for a lot of people. So developing boundaries gives people a sense of self, and it gives us the capacity to differentiate my experience from others' experience. It gives us the capacity to be assertive rather than passive or aggressive, which is the two polarities. You either become overly passive or overly aggressive. What else? I mean, I think part of having healthy boundaries is having body awareness too. I just want to make a comment about body awareness because it's often what happens in our body through interoception and through body awareness that tells us when our boundaries are violated. So if someone comes into my personal space, I might start to feel a bit contracted inside. Or if someone starts, yelling at me, my heart rate might go up and I might start to feel constricted in my breath and tight in my shoulders. That information is telling me that this person is kind of coming into my energetic boundary and I'm feeling violated. So if I'm not connected to my body and I'm not connected to body awareness, I'm much less likely to know what my boundary requirements are. So part of having healthy boundaries is coming back into embodied connection. and cultivating our interoceptive awareness.
It's really the starting point, isn't it? Just knowing
Mm,
on a somatic level what it feels like when a boundary is being crossed, what a internal no kind of feels like.
yeah,
Because what happens, it becomes so normal that we don't pay attention to it, and we tend to, and other people can label us this way as well. We end up labeling ourselves, but we label ourselves as, you know, a scaredy cat or someone who's fearful or someone who's timid because we're just so used to feeling that way in situations, and it's happened over and over again. And the issue becomes as well is whether it's, you know, relationships, as in a partner, or whether it's friendships and that kind of thing, we also create a dynamic, or we play a role, I should say, in creating a dynamic in these relationships where we're kind of the timid one, the people pleaser, the one with no boundaries. And so there's a
yeah,
dynamic then with somebody who is very used to us, used to being able to just overstep, because that's all they know. That's the information they've gotten about us. And then we start to learn this, and that
that's it.
becomes very uncomfortable, not just for ourselves, but for the people around us as well. Because it's like
Mm,
we're all in a movie, and we're the main character. And, you know, Noel, you're the main character, yours, Nicole, Carmine, you're all the main character. And then all of a sudden, for these other people in our life, it's like we're reading off script. It's like we're ad-libbing all of a sudden, and like, hang on, you're not meant to act this way and say that, and you're not meant to tell me no and set a boundary. And so it can
yeah,
get very uncomfortable in relational dynamics as well.
absolutely. Yeah, so true.
Yeah.
You
And
know,
all,
if we change ourselves, it's going to challenge the relationships that we're in. And sometimes those relationships won't last because ultimately we need to have people in our life that respect our boundaries too. It's, you know, it's a relational phenomenon having a boundary. There's your boundary, and then you need people that respect your boundary. So,
yeah, it's so
and
true.
yeah, and I think the other thing that I think is important, ingredient, if we think of the ingredients we need for healthier boundaries, access to our anger. And that's we've talked about that before, Ryan, that importance that for many people who have poor boundaries, they have learnt to disown or orphan or set off their anger because it was never supported in the first place, never attuned to, never, or too scary to get angry. Um, Especially if we're around a parent that was frightening. Often the learning is it's dangerous to be angry, or if I get angry, I'll get punished or rejected. So many people have learnt to disown their anger, and that sets them up to have poor boundaries. So a big part of reclaiming boundary capacity is to reclaim our healthy aggression and our inner strength and our anger, and to reintegrate that. And often there are a lot of barriers for many people around. There's a lot of work to be done, and inquiry work to help people look at the beliefs that stop them from being angry, or their resistance to being angry, and the early learnings that, you know, if I get angry, I'm going to become like my violent father, for instance. Or if I get angry, I'm going to end up being abusive. So I need to split off my anger and be a really nice guy, or a good person, or a responsible citizen, or a kind, caring, helpful person. And often people develop identities and dominant self-images that don't allow them to be angry. You know, like mine was, I should be nice and kind. That's what I developed as a result of my history. And I had to learn to accept that I'm not always nice and kind. You know, I had to integrate the part of me that could have the capacity to be hurtful, for instance. And the more I was able to kind of expand my eye boundaries, integrate my anger, and reclaim it, the more I had capacity to actually have an inner sense of inner strength to then say no when I needed to say no, and not be so mousy or not be so timid all the time, which is, I grew up very much in that way. Yeah.
Yeah. Because then also our kindness and caring for other people means more as well. Because now I'm caring for other people because it's genuine expression coming out of me, as opposed to the need to maintain some sort of identity that I'm a nice person and I always treat others well. Because there's moments in life where we should be assertive and we even should be aggressive. You know, if people are
Yeah,
breaking into my house and stealing my stuff when my family's home, that's not a time for me to be kind. You know, that requires aggression in that moment. And so that's part of us. You know, Dr. John Demartini, who I love his teachings, he said he went through the Oxford Dictionary of every human trait, like 3,000 of them or something. And he found that he's got all of them. And so does every other human being. We have all of these traits. They're
exactly.
part of being human, but we have the traits that supported our acceptance and attachment and perception of love growing up, and the ones that were the antithesis to that. And so we love these traits in ourselves, but we disown these traits in ourselves. So we hate
Mm.
displaying them, but we also hate when we see other people displaying those traits. Whereas if
Yes,
we looked at the whole
exactly.
picture and
Mm.
owned them all, then all of a sudden we realize we're all struggling with the same kind of stuff.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Well, I reckon we jump into some of the exercises, Noel. It's probably a great time to do that.
Okay.
Nicole
Yeah,
just
I
said
mean,
I had
it's
to
just,
Nicole just said I had to be learned to be kind to me. Yeah, so did I. So did I. Yeah, it sounds so like when like you wrote it. I'm glad you wrote it because it's so funny seeing it there. It's like I had to learn to like treat myself nicely, like something that we've lost so completely over our development and a life that we've lived that we have to learn. And it's so funny because those of us who, this is my experience, who outwardly seem the kindest to other people are on normally inwardly the bigger critic of themselves. And so there's a real um, lack of balance there, I found. And it's worth touching on
yeah.
before we get into the exercises, Noel, is
Mm,
when we
mm.
do suppress that anger, when we don't have those boundaries, when we're unable to be assertive, unable to say no, or our no doesn't hold any weight, then we'll invariably dip into resentment and we'll start to resent other people and we'll start with the people we love the most. And that state of resentment is, I heard we were referencing Gabor a little bit today, but it was actually someone I told him many years ago that, you know, if you have a choice between guilt or resentment, choose guilt every time because resentment is soul suicide. And that's a strong term, soul suicide, but resentment really is a toxic state to be in.
Yeah, and I would agree with that too. As I start to become more compassionate and more self-aware, and to take care of my needs and take care of my boundaries, my resent and my chronic unconscious anger started to lessen a lot. So I think there's an inverse relationship. The more you can own your needs and have good boundaries, the less angry you end up being.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
oftentimes a lot of people that I've seen that we turn that anger inwards. And so we're just stewing in all this internal anger without any of it being expressed. And then over time, that really can, you know, I've heard people describe depression as anger turned inwards, but not just that. I
Oh
mean, I've
yeah.
seen physical symptoms show up for people and all sorts of things. So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
all right,
totally.
I've made you the host. You have the power, Mr. Harburger.
Oh, God, I love that power. All right. Here we go. All right. So I was just going to share a couple of things about how do we work with boundaries, and some boundary exercises that help clients reclaim their capacity to become aware of their boundaries and their boundary needs, as well as aware of where they learned originally that they can't have boundaries as well. I think self-awareness, self-inquiry is an important part of understanding. Like you need to know um, what got in the way of you not having boundaries in the first place in order to start to reclaim your boundaries. And one of the things that I've found super helpful was, again, to quote Gabor Mate, um, I've done various bits of training with him over the years, and or watching his webinars and things like that. One of the things I learned from him was these wonderful inquiry questions, which I think are quite helpful in helping people start to understand their boundaries and get a sense of, at least at a cognitive reflective level initially. So I'll go through the questions. So a really good question is, where in my life do I have difficulty saying no or not showing up authentically? So just exploring the contexts where you have trouble having boundaries. Where in your life? Is it in your relationships, in your work, with your friends, with your family, with your loved ones, or your romantic relationships? And then to help people become aware of what is the emotional and the somatic impact of that issue of not being able to have an authentic no. And Ryan, you said before, often there are psychosomatic effects of that when people chronically have difficulty saying no, or they take over responsibility for other people's feelings and avoid disappointing people. Often the somatic effect is it does lead to chronic stress, and as that accumulates, it leads to health issues. And if you ever read the book When the Body Says No, Gabor Mate's book, as well as The Myth of Normal, he talks a lot about the correlation between physical disease and people's struggle to have good boundaries, because that accumulated resent and anger actually affects your immune system and affects your heart. It affects your all the different systems of the body get affected if you chronically have poor boundaries. So how does it affect you somatically? Often people are chronically tense. They have chronic pain patterns, gut issues. It can lead to fibromyalgia, for instance, if you've got a lot of shut down, interrupted boundary needs. The other great question is, what are the stories and the beliefs that maintain and perpetuate this pattern? That's a really important inquiry, pulling that out. And then where did you learn that? Where did you learn that you can't say no? Where did you learn to be appeasing or pleasing or freezing or dissociating and disconnecting from your anger? And how did that originally serve you? How was that once an adaptive pattern to help you survive? Again, appreciating the wisdom of our survival strategies of being unbounded or overbounded or appeasing is really important part of bringing self-compassion to the equation and taking the shame out of our struggles with boundaries, because the last thing we want is for the inner critic to come in and then attack us because we're appeasing or we're overbounded. So it's really helpful to bring context and compassion to where these patterns developed and how they once served us. And also that question of, what gets in the way of you saying no can be a great inquiry question to pull out those patterns and those beliefs, and then to start to bring context to it. So that's really important. I like the question, what was too much or too little in your history or your culture that made you lose your capacity to say no? And then to look at where in your life are you not saying yes? That's a really important question. Where in your life you're not saying yes? And who would you be, or what would be different if you could say no more authentically? And then really the experiment, as a Gestalt therapist and in EP, we invite people to do little experiments. So what could you do right now in your life to start saying no? Where could you start to experiment with that? And often a great place is with the therapist themselves, for them to practice in the safety of the therapeutic relationship to start to say no. So this leads into a lovely little exercise, which I really like, which is called finding your authentic yes and your authentic no. It's just just very simple, low-grade experiment is to invite your client to practice saying the word yes. Just say yes. And you can try this right now if you want, just to say the word yes. And just do this with your hands. Just yes. And notice what happens in your body when you say yes. That can bring up stuff. It can bring up fear, it can bring up resistance, or it can bring up a feeling of openness and strength. And then you might invite your client to practice saying yes to something like their favorite food. And you might, or yes to $5,000. And this is quite a playful little exercise. So you just invite your client to say, I've got your favorite food here. I'm going to give you a bowl of your favorite food. All I want you to do is just to say yes. And they get to go, yeah, I want that bowl of ice cream. Bring it on. And sometimes it's really nice to have an authentic yes to something. Yes to your favorite food. Yes to your favorite person. Again, for some people with attachment histories and difficulties, having an authentic yes is just as hard as having an authentic no. And then you can play with the no. Invite your client to say the word no and notice what happens in their body. What does it bring up? It could be activating, even without content. Just saying no can feel scary for someone with a history of boundaries leads to punishment. So practice what it's like just to say no, just without content. Just feel what happens in your body. Do you feel a sense of strength? Do you feel a sense of containment? Do you feel a sense of power? Or do you feel scared? Doesn't matter what comes up, but it's great to inquire into it. And then that can lead into saying no to content. So you might invite your client, ask them what's their worst favorite food, and they might say garlic snails. That would be what I'd say. I'd never want to eat a garlic snail. So then you imagine your therapist gives you a bowl of garlic snails, and your job is to say no. I do not want those garlic snails. And then just to feel what happens in your body when you say no and to work with what comes up. Again, it could be coupled with danger and fear, or your client might have a sense of satisfaction and strength. And if they feel a sense of satisfaction and strength, you help them really feel that in their body and land that into the felt sense. And I might even say, how come you want to say no? Just to help them have to really find the reason why they're saying no. So building that no, gradually building up the capacity to say no. Then you can invite them to say no with their hands, no to content, or you might invite them to imagine role-playing, saying no to someone in their life that they don't want involved in their life or they want to set a boundary with. So you can start to do some role plays or giving the person a contradictory experience to what they learned, basically, and having them build little moments of success and little new neural pathways and neural platforms to start to get familiar with the word no and with saying no and realizing the world's not going to fall apart. So I do that little exercise quite a lot with my clients. It ends up being usually quite playful. And whenever a client says no to me, like if I invite them to do an experiment and they say no, that's a chance for celebration. Like, what was that like to say no to me just then? I invited you to get up and stand up and do a little experiment, and you said, no, I don't want to do that, Noel. How was that for you to say no for me? And that can lead into a whole conversation. I invited a client last week to do an experiment. She said no to me, and we explored what it was like to say no. And she said it was really empowering for her. And then I said, what else would you like to say no to? And she started saying, well, actually, I don't like your new room. I don't like the way that table is over there. And she really got into her discernment. And it ended up being a very liberating conversation for her because she'd never really felt comfortable saying no and differentiating and discerning in front of people. And she had that corrective experience with me of me celebrating her no and celebrating her discernment and us still being in action. And that was a really powerful experience for her.
I love that. That's great. So now that you mention it, that piece of artwork shit and all that bit of furniture, your coffee's terrible here.
Yeah. She really let it go. She's actually quite a discerning person.
Because you can get that suppression just eases a little bit and then it comes out and it's quite beautiful to watch.
She texted me later after the session. She said that was an amazing session for her because she really got to explore her no in her relationship with me. And she said she used to idealize me and put me on a pedestal. And so saying no to me was very empowering for her, because her pattern is to idealize people. That was part of her boundary struggle.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
One of the ones that comes up as I'm reading that is when I'd have clients to do this and there's a resistance to say no, whether it's offering the garlic snails or saying, give me some money or something. And then if we remain present in the body, we get so much, wonderful information. And they might say no, but it's kind of a no. And we're like, let's close your
yeah.
eyes, go into that. How do you experience that? And we notice that there's a knot in
Yeah.
there that doesn't want to say no. And we can communicate with that knot or that tension. And oftentimes it would say, well, I don't want to say no because I want you to like me. And I'm like,
Yeah.
why is it so important that I like you? And then they invariably say, well, everyone should like me. And then we've got a whole can of worms that we can now jump into around why we have this unrealistic expectation that every human being on the planet must like us. And so we
Mm.
can jump into that and work out where that comes from. And it's such a great exercise that can open up so many gateways, look at what's happening in a person.
Yeah, resistance to setting boundaries is just as valuable as the experience of feeling good when you set boundaries, because you can just open up that resistance and do the EP flowchart work of just inquiring
EP is just
into it.
one, it's great for many things. It is just so wonderful at exploring resistance and working out
Yeah.
that little nexus point where we're like, no, don't want to go there. Exploring that, it's a wonderful process for doing that. Did you mind just going back one slide, Noel? Because there was just something, I had a little example come into my mind. Yeah, just it applies to all the questions, but I was working with someone recently, and this question here about where in my life do I have difficulty saying no? And it can be, some people can have difficulty everywhere, but I've seen with many clients is they can be very well boundaried in one area of their life and have completely none in another. And I was working with this person recently, and
True.
we were exploring romantic relationships, and they had a real lack of boundaries there. And there was a pattern that had gone on for some time. And then a little bit later, we were talking about a different area of life. It might have been work or career. And the way they were talking, they were standing up straight, shoulders were back, and they were so assertive, not over the top, just
Mm,
really
mm,
assertive. And I said, can you
mm.
notice how incredibly confident and boundaried, and I feel like I will not take any shit from you at work, and that you know what you're talking about? Just notice that. She goes, yeah, I'm very that way in this area. And I'm like, well, it's not, we don't completely lack that energy. It's not like it's gone from us and we
Yeah,
have to
it's
go and find it
gone in
somewhere.
every context. Yeah.
We just need to explore why it is absent in this area of life. And that's a wonderful realization for people.
That's great. I really like that point. And because if you actually look for the exception, like where in your life do you say no? Or when in your life have you said no? That can open up contradictory knowledge, which can challenge the old core belief that, I'm terrible with boundaries.
Because
And
those
it can
beliefs are
give
black and
people,
white, aren't they?
that's right.
Yeah.
So I always love to ask that kind of question, like in what contexts or in what experiences have you had the capacity to say no? And what was that like? And what does that tell you about yourself? And what does that mean about you? And what does that tell you about that part of you that can't say no? So yeah, it's always great to look for exceptions to the dominant story or the dominant narrative that people have, I think.
Challenge the narrative.
Because most people would have had a moment where they found their inner strength and they said no to something that they just didn't want to do. Um, and it's great to remember those moments because it brings you back to a sense of capacity and strength. So,
And also, I just encourage people, just as we're going through these slides, just whenever someone's watching this or the replay, just to screenshot these slides that Noel's putting up, because you can then revisit them and do those inquiry questions at a late point, whether it's today or tomorrow, or come back to them next week. But I'll try and in the recording upload these, but depending on where you're watching it, just take a screenshot so you've got access to it.
great. I'll share a couple of more exercises, probably two more in terms of time, but
Yep.
a really nice exercise is through the power of imagination. When the brain imagines something vividly, the body can't tell the difference between imagination and reality because it triggers the same neural firing patterns. So we can do a lot of great stuff through visualization and imagination. And one of the things that I think can be helpful is to invite the person to practice having a psychological boundary by inviting them to imagine a boundary around them that they can use their own metaphors, like a force field, or a wall or a sphere, and imagine if they had the perfect kind of boundary around them, what would that be made of? What would that look like? And to be inside that boundary and to invite them to feel what it's like to have a boundary around them. That's job is to protect them. And then you can start to plant kind of suggestions. So, and it involves a little bit of psychoeducation in a way. So you might say, inside this boundary, you get to take in only what feels healthy and true for you and what you feel comfortable to own. And this boundary keeps out what is toxic and what is not right and not healthy. And you get to choose that. So you invite them, so that offers a bit of psychoeducation as well. And then you might invite them to imagine and role play someone coming up to your boundary and for them to enact that boundary in some way, to kind of imagine saying, stop, or this is my boundary, you're not welcome in unless I let you. And often helping the person touch into the felt sense of what's it like to have a boundary and to be inside their boundary. That can be a really powerful exercise to use imagery. And at the same time, what's great is to say, and you're not responsible for the other person's emotional process or for their feelings. That doesn't mean you don't care, but you're not responsible to rescue them from their own feelings or fix their own feelings. And so they get a chance to play with imagining if they did have a boundary, what would that feel like? What would be different? So that can be a really nice kind of exercise, just kind of through imagination.
Can I tell you where
Particularly
my imagination's going?
Where does your imagination go, Ryan?
We're watching a lot of Star Wars in this house the last, 9 to 12 months with my son, and I'm getting right
Oh, so
into it.
cool.
There's
Yeah,
these
it's great.
there's these droids. They're on the bad side, but anyway, this is the visual I'm getting. They're called droidekers, and they quite powerful things, but they have this bubble around them, this kind of force field. It kind of comes back to your cell membrane analogy. But if people are shooting blasters at them that can't get through, they'll just rebound off.
Yeah,
But it can people can come in. You can, if it's someone to come and fix them or, be in there for protection or something, then they can just walk straight through the force field. So it'll repel
beautiful.
those things, once again, repel those things that are toxic for it, that is those that are healthy.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's a wonderful little exercise for someone who's never had their boundaries respected and they've experienced a lot of violation in their boundaries. To have an image of having a boundary around you can amazingly give the person a felt sense of containment and a felt sense of safety. The other thing you can do physically is invite someone to put a rope around them that represents their boundary. And I've done this. I did this with a client not long ago. He made a big boundary with a rope all the way around him, and I just invited him to walk inside that rope and to know that this rope represented his boundary and no one was allowed in unless he welcomed them. And he just walked around it. He felt the boundaries with his hands and he felt into it. And I was gobsmacked at what he said, actually. He said, wow, being inside this boundary makes me feel like an adult for the first time. And this was a guy who had major sexual abuse trauma and grew up with a physically violent dad, as well as a sexually abusing uncle. He had a lot of trauma from a very young age. And he was so terrified of the world that he just isolated himself. He just had major trust issues. And so we started working on his boundaries, and in this rope exercise, putting a rope around him, and it was quite wide. He made it a big sphere. But when he was in it, he said for the first time he felt a sense of being like an adult. And then he said, I feel like a man, which was kind of quite amazing to hear. And he was shocked at just how powerful it was to have something represent a boundary for himself. So that's a great exercise.
Well, it's giving something
Um,
solid and visual to something that's
right.
very much energetic and that we can't see. We all have an energetic boundary. We're just
Yeah.
oftentimes not aware of it or know where the borders of it are or know when someone's encroaching on it. So I think I love that exercise, giving something really solid
Very
to that.
solid and very concrete. Like you can do it with cushions, you can do it with a rope, you can do it with string. But it's quite nice to look at and then to go inside it, and then you can do different experiments within that boundary. But ultimately, it's coming to the felt sense and how the body feels to have a boundary around it.
Yeah. And I'll just touch
Um,
on one thing you said as well, Noel,
yeah.
which is important, was about other people are in charge of their emotional process. I think that's so
Yes.
important because one thing that we talk about in EP, surrogating, when we, surrogate the emotions of other people, which is oftentimes an adaptation from childhood. I know I had it. It's like, as a child, I don't know what to do to help this parent or caregiver. So I'll try and feel the emotion that they're feeling in an attempt to alleviate them in some way. But then we grow up and we do that very unconsciously with our partner, with our friends, with other family members, and that kind of thing. It's I always say it's difficult enough managing our individual emotions as a human being and the imprints and things that we've been through, let alone trying to process a dozen other people's stuff. And so recognizing that and creating an emotional kind of boundary there is so important. And just saying, look,
Mm,
that's your journey, that's your path. And that's not coming from a place of not caring. It's actually a place of
that's
honor
it.
and honoring their journey and their path and what they have to work through.
Absolutely. Beautifully said. It reminds me, Gabor Mate said something about the biggest barrier to having healthy boundaries is the fatal belief that I'm responsible to protect you from disappointment and I'm responsible for your feelings. And that kind of that rigid, dutiful, over-responsible stance
Mm.
for other people's feelings. He said that's the kind of that's the he calls it the fatal belief, you know, that I'm responsible if I disappoint someone, which I really like.
Yeah, it's brilliant.
And that is the challenge of having good boundary. We have to risk disappointing people, and that can be hard. Um, just the last exercise very quickly. This is a great one too, is to invite your client to stand at a distance from you, maybe 10 feet. Invite them to take a moment to become embodied and present and mindful. And then with their permission, you walk towards them at a pace that they coach you to walk at. And their job is to listen to what their body feels as you get closer and closer. And as soon as they notice something shift in their body, like an upbeat inactivation or a tightness or elevated heart rate or shallow breath or some kind of activation or adrenaline, their job is to use that internal interoceptive awareness to as a kind of indicator of their boundary, and then to say, stop, this is my boundary. You're not welcome to walk closer to me anymore. And then your job as the practitioner is to stop, take one step back, and just to say, I respect your boundary. And to give them that corrective experience of having their boundary seen and responded to and respected is very powerful. And also they get the chance to link their body awareness to their boundary requirements and their nervous system activation to their boundary requirements. So it's a really good exercise for them to link interoceptive nervous system awareness to boundaries, and then to have a boundary, to practice saying stop or putting your hand up, and practitioner respecting that. And then processing that experience, like mindfully, slowly exploring what's it like to set a boundary with me, what comes up for them, whether it's resistance, whether it's feelings of well-being and satisfaction and empowerment. But it's a really great experiential exercise to explore boundaries in that kind of, direct, immediate way. So that's another exercise that I've learned in the somatic experiencing community that I do a lot of work in.
Yeah, and that's a great one because
Yeah.
it ticks a couple of boxes, doesn't it? You spoke about your experience earlier, Noel, of seeing that contrary evidence in that group, of a boundary being seen and respected. And then it also ticks
Mm.
that other box of that becoming really somatically aware of what a no feels like for us. You know, because it does
Yeah.
any emotion, any boundary crossing, it's a very individual experience. So we need to know, like, oh, it's when I feel my stomach drops and my shoulders tighten and I can feel myself take a short little breath, and it'll be different from person to person. But knowing that is just so important, because as soon as I'm aware of it, then in my day-to-day life, I can go, okay, that's where a boundary is being crossed. This is where a boundary is being crossed. Then I can start to go about setting them. And then I can go, oh, now I'm worried about being abandoned, or I'm worried about disappointing people. And then we get to work through that. And it brings up all these layers and everything. But at the end of the day, we're trying to get to a place where we walk around in an empowered state where our no means no and our yes means yes. That's the thing. When we don't have boundaries, our no doesn't mean anything because we don't say it. We just people please. But
Right.
also our yes doesn't mean anything, because if I say yes to
Exactly.
everything, it doesn't hold any weight. It's just expected
Totally.
that I would say yes.
Totally.
And it's
Yeah.
very much, I always use the experience for those who like watching movies. There's a movie called V for Vendetta. Good movie, actually.
Yeah.
And
Okay. I'll keep that in mind.
there's a scene towards the end, Natalie Portman, who is a great actress. Nicole, you've probably heard me
Oh,
bang on about
she's
this like
great.
10 times.
Mm.
But
Mm.
it's just, it gives me shivers every time, because she's this very timid lady, and then there's all this crazy stuff happens, and then she goes through this kind of near-death traumatic kind of experience where she accepts her death and the fact that she's suppressed her anger, and she walks out onto this balcony with the rain pouring and screams, and her head shaved and everything. And then right at the end, she's about to put a train into drive and blow up the Parliament House in England or something. And the cop comes with pointing a gun at her, and he just says, "Take your hand off that, accelerator." And she just looks him in the eye and just says, "No." And he just sort of lowers his gun slowly, and there's no aggression behind it. There's no timidity behind it. There's just a look in her eye like, this no is
She was in
unwavering.
touch with her
And he
healthy
felt it.
power and
And the guy
strength.
pointing a gun at her sort of lowered it, because he felt how intense that no was, a very integrated no. So it's a good example if anyone wants to watch that movie.
Thank you. Great.
Cool. All right. Well, we will wrap it up there. We're up on the hour. Thank you two for joining us
We're
live.
up
It
for
was
the hour.
wonderful to see you.
Yeah.
And anyone watching the replay, let us know your comments or anything down below. I highly encourage, like I said earlier, screenshot those slides that Noel put up, and visit those, practice with them, play with them. And, this is why it's so important to have people around us who get this stuff and can work on this stuff. So if you're not in a practitioner, client relationship, then maybe there's, groups you can attend, or there's, that friend or somebody or someone in this community who also gets it, who's like, hey, let's sort of catch up, whether it's on Zoom or in person, and work on our resistances to setting boundaries, or working on what our no feels like. And, doing that relationally is only going to help the process, because the topic of boundaries happens in a relational dynamic. So thank you, Noel. Thank you, Carmine and
You're
Nicole, for
welcome.
joining us.
Yeah.
And have a
Yeah.
beautiful day.
Yeah.
All right.
Absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Bye.